Welcome everybody, Cody here with another photography tutorial. This time it's going to be on blending two different exposures in Photoshop. When you photograph high dynamic range scenes such as a sunset where you got a very dark foreground and a very bright sky, it's usually best to bracket your exposures, and basically what that means is you're going to take a base exposure and then you're going to take a -2, a -1, a +1, a +2, or you can just do three exposures, a 0 one, a +1, and a -1, and then in post-processing you can go and blend those two, so that way you do not have blown out highlights or really dark shadows. Your image will be exposed correctly. So I've got two images here, and these were taken at Horseshoe Bend in Page, Arizona. Highly recommend you visit it. It's absolutely beautiful. And I have the foreground exposure here, and as you can see, the foreground, the rocks, and everything is exposed correctly, but up in the highlights, they're sort of bright. This part specifically is blown out. So I also have another photo here, which was shot -1, and as you can see, the highlights in the sky are exposed correctly. However, the shadows, where the rock is and the river here, is very underexposed. And if you zoom in here, you can see a lot of noise here in the dark areas in the river. And the foreground exposure does not have that noise because it is correctly exposed. So if I zoom in here, you can see that there's no noise in the river. However, the highlights are blown out. So what I want to do is I want to blend these two photos together. So I'm going to use Photoshop for that, but first I'm going to show you some of the basic adjustments I did to each of these photos in Lightroom. So on the foreground exposure, I pulled down the highlights, I raised the shadows, added a little bit of clarity, some dehaze, a little bit of vibrance. I didn't touch the HSL nor the split toning, left the sharpening on 40, which I believe is default in Lightroom, and then I enabled profile corrections. And I also changed my profile to Adobe Landscape. On the sky file, I basically did the same thing, because when you blend two different exposures, you really want them to match as good as you can, because that it helps in the blending process. Because if you don't do it, you'll have some sharp lines where you blend them, and it's sort of noticeable depending on the shot. On this one, I upped the shadows as high as I could. You can see it's still dark. I changed the white balance on both of them just a little bit in the tint, and I added some dehaze in the sky using selective adjustments on each. So after this, after I did all the standard adjustments, I took the images into Photoshop, and to do that, you just right click on the image. You have to do this on each. Export, and then click export, and then under file settings, image format, it should be PSD, and then after export, open in Adobe Photoshop. I did this for both, and I have them already open here in Photoshop. So you can see here's my foreground exposure, and then over here I have my sky exposure. So to get this over onto the other one as layers, I'll just hit Command A, and I'll hit Command C for copy. So at that point it copies the entire image. And then I'm going to go over here to my foreground layer. I'm going to duplicate my background just so we can label some stuff. And then I'm going to hit Command V, and it's going to paste the sky layer over. I like to stay organized, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to label this foreground, and then I'm going to label this sky. Now, as you can see, when I click this on and off, only the sky layer is showing, and that's because we need to do some masking here. So to do a mask, you're going to click the layer you want. In this case, I want the sky layer, because I only want the sky showing on this layer. So this little icon right down here, it's a square with a little circle in it. You're going to hit that, and it's going to put a mask on that layer. And the basic rule of thumb in Photoshop is white reveals, black conceals. So right now my mask is white, meaning this layer is fully visible. So if I hit Command I, it's going to change this layer to black. Now none of the layer is visible, it's only showing the foreground layer. And that's what I want right now. But what I'm going to do is, the quickest way to do this, especially if you have a level horizon like this photo, It's actually pretty simple. Some different photos, if you had trees or non-buildings, non-level objects, you would do this a different way, and I would do that with luminosity masking, which I'm going to make a tutorial on that at some point in the future. But for this photo, the easiest way would be the gradient tool, and the gradient tool is right over here on the left-hand side. And I want to make a gradient from white to black, meaning white reveals, black conceals. So if I hit the gradient tool, and then I draw a line basically from here to here, it's going to only show the sky. So if I click this on and off, you can see that I successfully blended the two exposures together. And now my photo is evenly exposed. I have no blown out highlights, and my foreground is correctly exposed. And like I said, this technique will not work for images where there's buildings, trees, or whatnot, because it's not level. And for that, I would make a more complex selection with luminosity mask, or you could do a color range selection, but I'm going to save those for future tutorials. So if you enjoyed this quick tutorial, if you could give me a like on the video and subscribe to my channel. Also follow me on Instagram. I post a lot of landscape photos on there. And thank you for watching.